Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about the next big Nintendo Direct, this one being about Nintendo Switch 2. We just got our first big Nintendo Direct about Switch 2 on April 2nd, and now here I am on May 1st recording a video about the next one. When might this be? Could it perhaps be in June? And what sorts of leaks and rumors are we hearing about for this presentation? Well, perhaps more than you might be thinking, so that's what we're getting into today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 launches on June 5th, so if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So let's start things off by talking about this apparent leaked game for Nintendo Switch 2, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Apparently, it's set to be coming to the console. As you see here, they say before it was deleted, a tweet from the Saudi authorities suggested that the fighting game has been awarded a 12+ rating. So this tweet has been deleted already, but different outlets have reported that Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was officially rated for Nintendo Switch 2, and now that has been brushed under the rug. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is one of those games that a lot of us sort of assumed would be coming to Nintendo Switch 2. Many of us thought it might even be part of the day one launch lineup. But it looks like it's coming very soon, just not day one. And it could be one of these games that will be announced in the next big Nintendo Direct about Switch 2. And apparently, according to Nash Weedle, this Dragon Ball Sparking Zero rating, as you see the image here, this is before the tweet was deleted. According to Nash Weedle, Agosto. Agosto is the month of August. So is Nash Weedle here suggesting that this game is going to be coming out in the month of August? That makes some sense. If this were to be a announced game during a summer direct, maybe June or July, August would make a lot of sense for it to come out just a little bit later. But scrolling down this thread here, we see that Fultalinfo asks, ¿Y cuándo lo anunciarán? Which just means, and when would they announce it? And Nashville responds, second wave, and shares this tweet he made on April 18th here. And here it reads, Leak Express, desde un studio third me confirmaron que tienen pendiente anuncios para Switch 2 porque Nintendo lo mostrará en el próximo Nintendo Direct. And this part basically means that from a third party who had confirmed to him that there are announcements for the Switch 2 that will be happening in the next Nintendo Direct. And then here he says, Parece que esto ocurrió con más estudios thirds y Nintendo quiere sorprender con un segundo oleada de anuncios de terceros. And basically this means here that there is going to be a second wave of third-party announcements. You look at the Switch 2 Direct, we had these two different spotlight segments where they showcased a lot of pretty significant AAA third-party games coming to Nintendo Switch 2, and it seems like Nashville is suggesting from what he has heard that more like this will be happening in the next Nintendo Direct, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is a part of this second wave. Now some of you may be wondering, who's Nash Weedle, or why trust Nash Weedle? Well, it's because Nash Weedle seemingly keeps getting things correct. In the past, we've talked about how they leaked Metroid Dread, or how they leaked Mario and Luigi Brothership. Or even this year, they leaked that 3D Mario would probably not be at the Switch 2 Direct, but a 3D Donkey Kong would be. We have now Donkey Kong Bonanza. Or how there would be a special edition of Elden Ring, and now we have Elden Ring Tarnished Edition coming to Nintendo Switch 2. But they also talked about there being another game, which also apparently has now been leaked. Assassin's Creed Shadows has already been leaked to be coming to Nintendo Switch 2 according to a new rating. So as we scroll down, here it reads, the front page of the PEGI website currently lists the most searched games in its database. Top of the list is currently Assassin's Creed Shadows, but under the game's name it lists the supported formats as PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, PC, and Nintendo Switch 2. When you check the actual page for the game, Switch 2 is not listed. One potential reason for this is that PEGI may be able to hide platforms for games on their database if they haven't been confirmed yet, and this hidden tag is somehow mistakenly appearing on the front page. And so you guys know, back on August 12th, 2024, Nash Weedle was saying that Assassin's Creed Shadows would be coming to Nintendo Switch 2 early on. And so now we have another leak from Nash Weedle that has seemingly been proven true. We have ratings for these different third-party games that are apparently going to be showing up in the big Nintendo Switch 2 Direct that will be happening next. But there's more to discuss here in terms of games that may be showing up during the Switch 2 Direct. A decent amount more. So, it was pointed out by Necrofelipe on Twitter that this YouTuber, XS1STV, that The Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remastered will be coming to Nintendo Switch 2. Currently, there is active work at Bethesda for this project. Now, the thing about XS1STV, they were also talking about, before the big Switch 2 Direct, that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond would not be in the presentation. And Metroid Prime 4 Beyond was in the presentation. So, my first impressions of this apparent leaker here aren't as high as maybe they should. However, I will also point out that they are given much respect by many people because they have a history of getting a lot of other leaks correct, specifically with ones away from Nintendo. So, I would say that, sure, yeah, maybe they are correct about this Oblivion Remastered coming to Nintendo Switch 2. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, let's forget this being a rumor. Do we think it makes sense for Oblivion Remastered to come to Switch 2? And the answer is yes. And I say this because we've already seen a fair bit of support on Nintendo Switch 1 from Bethesda, who is now owned by Microsoft, who also supports Nintendo quite well. So I think it's pretty reasonable to believe that there will be more Bethesda games coming to Nintendo Switch 2, if not more so, because the Switch 2 has already been shown to be a capable console, at least more than many were expecting, perhaps more capable for its current time compared to Switch 1 in its time when it was relevant. Like, we've already seen a lot of different games like Cyberpunk and Hogwarts Legacy, where it's talked about how these versions are far better than, say, PlayStation 4, for example. So the Switch 2 may not be as powerful as a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X, but it may be pretty close to an Xbox Series S, which gets a lot of these games already. So I do think it's very likely that Oblivion Remastered can make its way over to Nintendo Switch 2, and also I gotta say, a game like that, a first-person adventure RPG that is very popular on PC, well, Switch 2 has those mouse controls that would work really well for this game. I could see some people perhaps even preferring Oblivion Remastered on Switch 2 as opposed to PS5 and Series X for this reason, assuming the game looks and runs well enough. So I won't be putting Oblivion Remastered under the leak category, but I do think this is a rumor that makes a lot of sense, and I would even go as far as to predict that it is going to become a reality. But so far we've just been talking about third-party announcements. What about some first-party offerings? Well, Nash Weedle has said some things about some first-party announcements for later this year from Nintendo. There will be one surprise game launching this year for Switch 2, one announcement of a major game for 2026 for Switch 2, two Switch game announcements for Switch 1 for 2025. So let's speak on the Switch 1 announcements first. Nate the Hate earlier this year said that Kirby Planet Robobot would be coming to Switch 1 in 2025. That could be one of these Switch 1 games. Now I do find it interesting that we already have the Switch 2 edition for Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and also Kirby Air Riders coming this year, but those are Switch 2 offerings. Nintendo may still want to put out some Switch 1 offerings as well. Kirby Planet Robot could be one of them. Now, another game that I've been waiting to see sort of an announcement for that I think should be coming to both Switch 1 and Switch 2 by extension thanks to backwards compatibility and perhaps also a Switch 2 enhancement or edition, is this MMO that Nintendo was playtesting late last year. They were already playtesting it for Switch 1, so I feel like it makes a lot of sense to think that it would still come to Switch 1. And we just got this recent update where they made some changes to Switch 1 so it can stay relevant moving into the next generation alongside Switch 2. It has the game sharing feature, virtual game cards. So I don't really think we should be thinking that Switch 1 is going to totally die off. I do expect Nintendo will be making some announcements, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe this playtest program is one of them for this year. Of course, it could be something else, assuming what even Nash Weedle here is suggesting is true. While I do bring them up a lot because they are showing a history of continually getting things right and a seeming strong connection to the industry, that doesn't mean they get everything right. So yes, take this all still with a grain of salt. Now, the one major announcement for a big Switch 2 game in 2026, I assume, is going to be 3D Mario, having to do with the 40th anniversary, which takes place later this year, which might mean we don't even see the announcement for 3D Mario in the next Switch 2 Direct, because I don't think it would be happening as late as September. I think there will be a Direct in September, but I think we will have one before then, probably June, maybe July, which I'll speak a little bit more on in a moment here. We've talked about this part before. There is apparently a surprise game launching this year for Switch 2. If you think about it, it makes sense for there to be at least one more exclusive Switch 2 title for this holiday. We're getting Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza to launch the console in the first couple months. And then after that, there are some other big games like Pokemon Legends ZA, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, but these are not Switch 2 exclusives, and while I do think they will be a big deal, and they will certainly be popular on Switch 2, I do think Nintendo needs at least one more exclusive to come out during the holidays to help to push this hardware and give people more reason to buy the console. My theory is Luigi's Mansion 4, I've talked about this already, but of course there are other possibilities. But let's now speak on the timing of when we're going to see this Nintendo Direct. So, as you see here on the Nintendo Direct archive page, we've just gotten 3 Nintendo Directs pretty close to each other. We had the March 27th Direct, a week later we had the April 2nd Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, and then a couple weeks later we had the Mario Kart World Direct. In less than a month's span of time, we had 3 major presentations. Now, some people might argue that the Mario Kart World Direct was more of just like a giant overview trailer that we knew a lot about already, but point is, we had 3 direct presentations in a short span of time. This to me is very interesting because it shows that Nintendo is absolutely trying to push things right now. They are actively marketing everything they have to offer as we enter the new Switch 2 generation. And it actually reminds me a little bit of what happened back in 2017 when they launched the Switch 1. So as you see here, they had a Fire Emblem Direct in January, a Switch 1 Direct in April, an ARMS Direct in May, a Splatoon Direct in July, a September Direct, an Animal Crossing Mobile Direct in October, and a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Direct in November. Now, some things that are missing here because they weren't labeled or branded as Directs at the time. Now Nintendo's a little bit more consistent with pretty much branding everything as a Direct now, but back in 2017, they also had the big Switch 1 presentation, and then we also had the Spotlight presentation, which was Nintendo's basically their E3 Direct for that year, even though they didn't brand it as an E3 Direct. And so point is, 2017 had the highest density of direct presentations if you include those other ones. And it makes sense because this was a huge transition year. It was the launch year for the Nintendo Switch. So we go back to the top of the page here, looking at what we have so far. We have 3 major presentations in a short span of time. I don't think you should look at this and think, okay, that means there won't be anything else for a while. I think, no, there's going to be more because there's still a lot more to say. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be in another week or two. I think we're going to have to wait until June at the earliest, and probably late June at that, because we have Summer Games Fest to start the month of June. And while maybe you could argue, well, maybe the first week of June, but that's when the Switch 2 is launching, so I don't think it's going to happen then, which leaves the second half of June, really, for when Nintendo might be giving us a direct presentation. And if you look at the last prior years, last year we had a Nintendo Direct on June 18th, we go back to 2023, we had a Nintendo Direct on June 21st, so Nintendo Directs as of late, now that they are no longer beholden to the E3 timing, they've been happening a bit later on into the month, but still happening in the month of June. So I expect that Nintendo will want to follow up the big Switch 2 launch with a major Direct just a few weeks later in the second half of June. Maybe some of these third-party games we talked about will be announced during the Summer Games Fest, but I do think a lot of them will be saved for another partner spotlight or two during the next big Direct, which I believe most likely will be happening in the second half of June. Possibly July, maybe Nintendo wants to wait a little bit later. I think it's worth pointing out that Nintendo had an April Nintendo Direct about 6 weeks removed from the launch of the Nintendo Switch 1, and before this presentation we saw the launch for both Breath of the Wild and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, so perhaps Nintendo will wait until after the launch for both Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. But I think most likely it will still be happening in June because they need to give us release dates for different games coming out throughout the summer, and now is not the time to be waiting until last minute to be making these announcements. Now is the time to be marketing and being as active as possible. We need a date for the summer release of Drag Drive. We need a date for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I think it's coming out September, we shall see. And they need to make announcements for other things coming out this year, not just including the big surprise title for this holiday, presumably, not just including a lot of third-party offerings, but also some Switch 1 games as well. I think it's worth noting that not only did we not see any sort of major game release from Nintendo in the month of April, it doesn't look like we're getting one in the month of May either. Nothing's been announced yet, at least. And it's already May 1st, so it seems pretty unlikely. That's a pretty long gap of time for us to not get a Nintendo published title. This hasn't happened, well, throughout the entire Switch era, which makes sense because they are transitioning over to Switch 2, but there are still some Switch games that should be coming. Point is, it's more reason to expect a June Direct. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.